They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, here we go, folks. Hour number 2. Thank you so much for being with us. Coming up at the bottom of this hour, we're going to be talking with foreign policy analyst, also Islamic historian, terrorism analyst as well. You've seen his contributions over at thehill.com before. His name is Mr. Dan Perkins. Dan will be with us again. We're going to be talking about Brexit. We're going to be talking about this march that happened. Also, the fact that Tommy Robinson now in a position in the UKIP party over there, and Nigel Farage leaving the party because of that appointment. I'm going to get his take on all of this. And also generally just the idea that elites can't stand you and me. Whether it's the election of Donald Trump, Brexit, or the Yellow Vest protests out of France that have spread into Belgium and the Netherlands. They really are upset that the people are not on board with their agendas that don't put the people of individual nations first. And that's what we're seeing. More and more people are coming to the same conclusions. And I made this observation, by the way. So many of the problems that these different countries are having are the same. And it's because the goal is a globalistic mindset. And if it's a globalistic mindset, then you want to do to every developed country basically the same thing, the same goals. Weaken your borders. Okay, well, we see that in the developed nations in Europe. Their borders are weak. They've got an immigration problem. We see the same problem over here in America. The same problem. It's going to increase the welfare rolls. It pushes wages further down for working class. The goal is to shrink the middle. It's almost as if the goal is to do this, have the immigration problem to shrink an affluent middle class. That's the same problem. The same problem. We here across the states experience a similar problem that the European Union does. It's just on a grander scale. We send our money to Washington, D.C., right? And the ever-growing federal government enriches themselves off of it, and then they send it back to us with strings attached as long as we'll pass the laws they want us to pass, weakening individual state sovereignty. Well, that's the same thing that they're doing over in Europe, and that's why the UK voted out, because they were tired of sending all of their money, which was a considerable amount, proportionally compared to the rest of the European Union, sending it to Brussels, Brussels sending it back to the UK, but telling them what they have to do with it. And so that's the same problem. That's what's being rejected in a lot of ways over in Europe and in France. Because what are they mad about in France? Well, they're mad about the fuel tax, but they're really mad about this globalistic loyalty, more loyal to the international order than they are to their own people. Once again, Donald Trump is right. He's right about the Paris Climate Accords, and he's right about what the definition of nationalism actually is. Don't you mean mean white nationalism? When you say nationalism, don't you mean white nationalism because you're white? No, just mean that we want to help other people across this planet, other countries. We're good to do that, but we're not going to do it at the expense of our country. Here at home, we're not going to go in any bad deals and everything else. Isn't that a racist thing to say? Isn't that racism? No, it's nothing to do with racism. Just talking about the country in general. Anyway, we'll talk more about that at the bottom of this hour. Let's start with some Arkansas news, shall we? This has alarmed a lot of people. Over the weekend, this story broke from Andy Davis And I want to say this is a very well-written piece by Andy Davis. A lot of information here. And when I saw the headline, and I have a pretty good memory of what was said, what was promised, the public spend for why you do X or Y or Z. And when I read this headline, plans to change Medicaid set off provider alarms in Arkansas. Caps, cuts, imperil in-home assisted living care, they say. When I read that headline, this number popped up in my head. And the number is $835 million. Now, why is that number relevant? Well, if you've been following this story, you know that under Republican leadership, they set out to cut $835 million from traditional Medicaid spending in order to pay for Medicaid expansion. That's what they set out to do. Now, they bragged about it. As a matter of fact, they said, we're not going to be cutting services either. There's a lot of waste in Medicaid. And we're going to cut $835 million over 5 years, and it won't affect services. Now, my response was, I don't necessarily believe that, but even if I did, I don't think it's right to take money away from those who are truly needy, who are on Medicaid. I'm not saying that there's somebody on Medicaid that doesn't really deserve to be on it, but for the most part, we have established as a society that Medicaid is for those who truly can't help themselves, okay? And whether or not that's the case, and, there's always exceptions, but you get the point. Well, we decided to expand Medicaid. We had 700,000 people on Medicaid. We decided to essentially expand Medicaid 300,000 more to where 1/3 of the people in this state are on Medicaid. 1 million people out of 3 are on Medicaid. That's essentially what we decided to do. The Republicans did it with Governor Beebe, a minority of Republicans, and they've got us in this mess where now we have so many we've got such high in the dollar figure in future obligations that we had to figure out how we're going to pay for it when the federal government ratchets down its 100% to 98 to all the way down to 90 to where we have to pay 10. What are we going to do? Well, the health care reform task farce, which at this point has been proven to be a farce, they came out and said, we're going to cut $835 million so that we can pay for able-to-work adults on Medicaid expansion with no dependents. A good percentage of don't work. That's why they want that. It wasn't all of a sudden that they wanted to trim the budget and tighten the belt. That had nothing to do with it. It had everything to do with obligating our state more money in this direction in a growth of government. We got to find out how we're going to pay for this. Oh, let's go to Medicaid. Let's go to those who truly need it. And let's save. Let's, quote, save. But you're not really saving because you're turning around and spending it on another program. And this is the result of that. Throw the headline up there. Here you see Dan Douglas on the, I guess he's pictured here. Interesting. Proposed changes in Medicaid rules will cause assisted living facilities to go out of business and reduce services to elderly and disabled Arkansans at home, service providers say. Now, for those of you pro-Medicaid expansion people out there, I'm really glad they're making this argument because it's the hospitals are going to close argument right back in your face. Oh, hospitals are going to close. Hospitals are going to close if we don't expand Medicaid. So please don't try to challenge this. Well, some of these businesses assisted living facilities are going to close. Okay. The changes, which would take effect next month, include a nearly 22% reduction in the rates paid to assisting living facilities and set annual per-person caps on the in-home help provided to participants in the AR Choices program. The changes, according to Andy Davis, are part of the state's efforts to slow the growth of Medicaid spending by enough to save $835 million. There it is. See, I knew it. I knew it was in there. $835 million from the fiscal year that started July 1st, 2017 through 2021. Providers say the moves will result in more elderly and disabled residents ending up in nursing homes where the cost of their care will be higher. That'd be good for the nursing homes. The Home Instead Senior Care franchise serving Washington, Benton, Carroll, and Madison counties last month notified the 48 Our Choices participants it had been serving that it will stop participating in the program because of the changes. A manager said the changes will increase the firm's administrative costs. The Oaks at Mena, an assisted living facility, has already struggled with vacancies caused by a cap on the number of people in the state who can receive help from Medicaid to live in such places. The rate reduction is going to just basically finish it off, she said, according to Lisa Master. State Representative Dan Douglas, who attended a meeting of providers last month at the AARP offices in Little Rock, said he's heard more from Arkansans about the proposed changes than any other issue since he was elected in 2012. Quote, people are concerned, he said. People are worried about their loved ones. And then are we just going to cram this down their throats and not take care of our most vulnerable citizens? That's bothersome. Again, why are we not going to take care of our most vulnerable citizens? Why? Republicans, you're killing me, man. You're killing me. What is it the Democrats say about Republicans? That you want to throw Granny over the cliff? This brand of republicanism from the leadership is kind of verifying what the Democrats always accuse Republicans of, is it not? It's funny that you grew government, which is what the Democrats are huge fans of, right? Both parties are frauds. But unless you want to actually do what the platform says. I mean, literally, this is we have an example here where the Democrats say you want to throw Grandma out of the nursing home. Out of the nursing home. And that's exactly what is about to happen. I mean, if they're right. I mean, if they really are right that these reductions. I mean, it's $835 million over 5 years. This cannot be argued. It's $835 million reductions in traditional Medicaid over 5 years to pay for Medicaid expansion, which are people that are, okay, let's just say, I would say they don't need it. The left's going to say, no, they need it. Okay, they don't need it as much. Can we agree that they're not the most vulnerable? That's why you have two different Medicaids, right? So this is the cost of socialized medicine, really. You know why? Supply and demand. I mean, if you're going to guarantee people have health care or health insurance, you're going to have to ration it. Period. Supply and demand 101. You want everybody to have it? Then you're going to have to limit what some people can get. And being in an assisted living facility, well, you're old. We can't spend that much money on you. You're old. We need to spend it on the young people. That is what's going on here. It is textbook symptoms of full-blown socialized medicine right here in the state of Arkansas. And you can't even argue with it. There is no argument to be made. Andy Davis, I didn't know if the Gazette was going to do this, but hat tip to the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, specifically Andy Davis, because he spelled it out right here. Highlight this paragraph, Joe. Governor Asa Hutchinson in 2015 set the goal of slowing the growth of spending in the traditional Medicaid program by enough to reduce spending by about $167 million a year, or $835 million over 5 years, to help pay for the cost of Medicaid expansion. I'm so glad that he didn't leave this part out. This is, in a nutshell, period, the biggest bombshell in the entire story, because I remember him going to the task force on health care. Remember when we had a task force on health? Now we have a task force on taxes, but anyway, that's neither here. We are a government of task forces, by the task force, of the task force, whatever. So he went to the task force and he said, I propose we save $835 million for a traditional Medicaid to pay for the Medicaid expansion. I mean, we played it on loop over and over and over again. I don't have it at my fingertips right now, but I'm saying it's out there. I'm glad Annie Davis remembered it. I'm glad there are other people out there that actually remember this was the goal. This is the plan coming to fruition. And it's going to result in these assisted living facilities having less money, and, they're dependent on Medicaid. They're dependent on these elderly people to use their facilities. But if it's not financially viable for them, guess what? You're going to have to go somewhere else. So, it's a big deal. And what we are seeing here is the bills come and due. That's all. That's the free ride is over. Any economic argument, meaning for the state, any financial benefit that the state was receiving by getting this $2 billion scot-free a year, it's now over. The other side, maybe they just should have been a little bit more honest with us. Instead of talking about, the private option and, trying to spin it, maybe they just should have said, hey, listen, it's all this federal money, and we got to have it. And so that's really why they did it. They did it for the money. It's all about the money, right? Well, that's now gone. The money's gone. The money's been spent. And we got to pay 10% a year now of $2 billion. That's why you want to raise internet taxes. That's why you want to raise gas taxes. That's why you want to pay. That's why you want to extend a current tax by passing another one that's due to sunset. It's because we don't have any money, folks. I mean, that's just the bottom line. We have no money. We have no money. And here is a result of big government. I mean, that's what this is. We overextended. I mean, it's big government every way around. And it really, we're here because of irresponsible. We're here because irresponsible people refused to be honest and just say what was coming down the pike. We don't have politicians in leadership that looked at this problem like a businessman would look at the problem. As a businessman, if it was all about dollars and cents, you can understand why they took the money. The federal government was paying 100% of it. And now the federal government is going away. They're only going to pay 90%, and that 10% is a huge chunk of money. Any businessman would say, oh, all right, we're going to end the program now. Any businessman would say it. They'd say, oh, well, that was good while it lasted. We're going to end the program now. They refuse. They refuse to look at the numbers on the Excel spreadsheet and admit that it was all about the money. It had nothing to do with actually caring for people. They like to claim that it did, but I promise you it didn't, because all the Republicans that went along with this campaigned and said they wouldn't never do this. But all that money is what convinced them. Again, talk about stereotypical accusations against Republicans. It's funny when you don't have pro-market Republicans and instead you just have big business Republicans, you get results like this. We're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We got Dan Perkins coming up at the bottom of this hour.
We're protesting for any other issue. It would have been wall-to-wall coverage by the mainstream media, and your anchormen would have been there on the streets with their camera crews doing live coverage. But because they were protesting a climate change tax, the media basically hushed up the story. Emmanuel Macron was raising taxes to the point that a gallon of gas in France would have cost over $7. And the reason why is he said we need to punish people for using fossil fuels to address climate change. And the regular folks of France who cannot afford this tax took to the streets in protest. And yeah, after a week of violent protests, 4 people died. I mean, it was a tragedy what happened, the amount of damage and death. But the president of France had to back down and say, all right, we're not going to put this forward. But this is the radical agenda people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are trying to push down in America. These are the types of punitive taxes. They want to punish people for using fossil
Who's
fuels.
next to Zipline?
And yet a little
Me,
article...
I'm really excited about this.
Sir, I'm sorry. The Zipline has a 350-pound weight limit, and frankly, I do not think it would be safe for you.
Oh, that's okay. I self-identify as 180 pounds, so it's cool.
Sir, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm afraid we can't let you ride the Zipline. You're too heavy. I'm sorry.
I can't believe this. I thought we had evolved as a society. I thought this was America, but I guess this is just my plight. First slavery, and now fat shaming.
Sir, again, I'm really sorry.
You listen to me. If you don't let me ride, not only will I sue this company for discrimination, I will sue you for damages because right now my feelings are so hurt and I feel embarrassed because I'm holding up the line.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Watch it, mister.
Look, okay, I'm sorry. I just don't think it would be safe for you.
You don't understand. I self-identify as skinny. So you have to let me ride the zip line. The Constitution says so. I get to define my own reality.
Oh, you know what? Okay, fine. Whatever. Ride the zip line. Mike, let this man ride the zip line.
Thank you. Now watch as my self-identity trumps your bigotry. See you on the other side, racist. Here I go! Doctor, thank goodness. What's the prognosis?
Sir, we've done everything we can, and you only have seconds to live.
No, you cannot say that. I do not self-identify as a dead person.
PHP Parody. Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I'm going to read some of these Facebook comments just because it has to be done. It absolutely has to be done. So we're talking about how there are these cuts to our elderly that are coming down the pike. Those who are in assisted living homes saying they're going to have to close because the state is cutting their reimbursement rates in an effort to save $835 million over 5 years to pay for able-to-work adults to have free health insurance through Blue Cross Blue Shield. Jackie on Facebook writes that the Tea Parties warned Republicans this would happen and they threw them under the bus. Karen writes, our elderly, our seniors, there's all these new comments coming in, and I can't keep up with them. Arkansas is always the first little piggy under the bus. Republicans have too many egos to admit they were wrong. The Arkansas GOP needed the Tea Parties to gain the majority. Once that was accomplished, they couldn't kick the Tea Party members out the back door. The Tea Party led the fight against Obamacare. We were at the Capitol lobbying against it every day. We held a big rally in Little Rock. Don't bankrupt our state. This was certainly, I remember all of this, and I remember, I remember how, we've been telling you that this day was coming for a long time, and now here it is. Just so you guys know, Arkansas this year will be paying $138 million this year. This year, $138 million. So if you go back to this headline here, plans to change Medicaid, okay, they're cutting the reimbursements. They're reducing spending in the traditional Medicaid program this year to $167 million. That would cover the $138 million that they need to pay this year. Next year, we'll pay $168 million. Again, be about the same. The following year, we'll have to pay $218 million when we're paying the full 10%. Folks, we don't have the money.
For protesting for any other issue, it would have been wall-to-wall coverage by the mainstream media, and your anchorman would have been there on the streets with their camera crews doing live coverage. But because they were protesting a climate change tax, the media basically hushed up the story. Emmanuel Macron was raising taxes to the point that a gallon of gas in France would have cost over $7. And the reason why is he said we need to punish people for using fossil fuels to address climate change. And the regular folks of France who cannot afford this tax took to the streets in protest. And yeah, after a week of violent protests, 4 people died. I mean, it was a tragedy what happened, the amount of damage and death. But the president of France had to back down and say, all right, we're not going to put this forward. But this is the radical agenda people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are trying to push down in America. These are the types of punitive taxes. They want to punish people for using fossil fuels. And yet a little article broke yesterday. Bernie Sanders, in the last month of the campaign, spent $300,000 on private planes. I wrote about it on our website, collegeteacher.com. So he took private planes at the cost of $300,000 to go around the nation and tell us to not use fossil fuels. So the high priests of the climate change religion are all a bunch of phonies and frauds. It's a made-up hoax. It's used to drive a radical agenda, and that's why my organization tries to stop it.
You mentioned that it's a religion, and I agree. I think it is. I think there are people that do hold to this concept. I've called it Gaia worship before, but I mean, yeah. I think a lot of that on the progressive left, it is a religious dogma to the point where if you disagree with them, you're a heretic, and they approach every argument on the basis that they're already a better person than you are.
Exactly, and that's why they have to use the language of religion. So you have to believe in climate change. They ask you to believe in science. If you don't, you are called a denier. There is nothing more unscientific than saying you have to believe in science, right? The idea of consensus is not a scientific notion. So they have to use language of faith and religion to push this. The last climate report that came out that people said was damning to the administration, the White House released it after Thanksgiving. They were required by law to release this report. They are required annually to release this report. But when they put these reports out, climate change activists, they always do things like play with the data. So, for example, they used hurricanes since the 1970s and said, look at this chart. Since the 70s, the number of hurricanes have increased. If you extended that chart 150 years,
the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, folks, welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for being with us today. We have a few headlines here I want to get to that were pretty interesting. From the Independent, Brexit Betrayal March. Tommy Robinson and UKIP lead London protest amid huge police operation. This was 19 hours ago. Police appeal for people to protest peacefully amid disorder. This is while Paris is burning. Now, why is UKIP having this protest? Well, they're having this protest because the elites haven't taken the people seriously. The elites haven't taken the people seriously. They wanted out of Brexit, and they're not listening, okay? Well, then we also have this story here. Nigel Farage unveils plan to form a new party to fight the biggest battle yet for the independence for the European Union. Nigel Farage made headlines last week when he left the United Kingdom Independence Party because of Tommy Robinson's appointment in the party. Here more to talk more about this and everything that's going on overseas. We have Mr. Dan Perkins, who's a foreign policy analyst. He's also the author of the book, The Brotherhood of the Red Nile Trilogy. He's an expert on Islamic history. Dan Perkins, welcome, sir.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. It's always great to have you back. So what's your take on the events? What's going on across the pond?
What's going on across the pond started over 2 years ago when the English people in a referendum decided they wanted to save their culture and leave the European Union. The European Union unelected bureaucrats were forcing changes in British law, and to the point that about 60% of the laws on the books in Britain were dictated by the bureaucrats in Brussels. So the British people had an opportunity to get out and try and get their country back, and they voted much in the same way American people decided to try to get their country back by voting for Donald Trump. The elites, much like what happened with Donald Trump, were outraged that the British people were so stupid to want to leave the European Union. So they have been, for the better part of 2 years, trying to override the will of the people, much like the Democrats have been trying for 2 years to override the will of the people in the United States with the election of Donald Trump. Then you add to that what's happening in Paris and what's happening in France, and now over the weekend in Brussels and in the Netherlands. That is that the European people have begun to understand, and when I say people, middle class, poor, unions, have begun to understand the financial implications of paying for the changes to take care of global warming. And they're seeing it in the increase in price of gasoline and diesel. The French wanted to increase gasoline prices by 12.5 cents a gallon and 28.5 cents a gallon on diesel fuel, which is more prevalent in cars in Europe than it is in the United States. And the people began to say, no, it's not what we want the money to do. And so the whole underpinnings of the elites is under attack, whether it's Brexit in the UK or the global warming and the ability to pay, or the need to pay through the common people for the cost of greening up of France and other countries. It's a basic revolt against the elites in both countries.
And it all seems to have just to me. I mean, I wasn't following this. I mean, I don't think our media wasn't covering it over here in the United States.
No.
But so was it really sudden, or were there other stories that I've missed? Did it just kind of build up and boil over? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm in fact writing a piece on that right now, and what I believe has happened is that when we first started talking about global warming, we talked in terms of theory. We're still only talking in terms of theory, not reality. So with the Paris Accord, it obligated countries to do certain things. Now, we pulled out as the United States, but Paris, France, the bastion of the whole global warming situation, was forced into taking the theoretical into reality, and that took time. It's taken a lot of time, and now we're looking at programs that were evolving from the government, driven by the elites over the last several years, and now it's moved to reality, and it's moved to funding. And so Maroon, I call him Macaroon, the head of France. He's now saying that he wants to suspend the gasoline and diesel tax, but his government officials are wondering where's he going to get the money to pay for the initiatives in global warming. At the same time all this was happening, our former vice president who invented the internet, Mr. Gore, was having, in essence, a telethon to support global warming. And it was supposed to be a 24-hour telethon. And after 4 hours, it was canceled. He said it was a result of sympathy for the protesters in Paris. The practical reality is that the, quote, scientists were so outraged at the way he was conducting himself on the air, people were canceling, and they canceled it after 4 hours.
Wow.
So this has all been going on. And you're right in your observation. It's not being reported, has not historically been reported in the United States for one very simple reason. It is not part of the mainstream media's agenda. In fact, it's counter to the agenda. The idea that the middle class is going to have to pay for what the elites want in terms of what's going on. You know, two quick examples. when we had the tsunami that destroyed the nuclear power plants in Japan, Germany decided they were going to shut down their nuclear reactors and replace them with wind farms and solar panel farms. And they found out that the efficiency of generating electricity for what they were doing in terms of these two alternative green sources was insufficient. So in order to keep their factories running and people's houses warm and all this, they went into the European grid and they bought electrical power from France, which was primarily generated by nuclear power. Now we've got a situation where they have increased demands, and they're talking about opening up coal mines and starting up some of the coal-fired plants that were shut down, which is a conflict with the global warming people, because coal presents the highest level of CO2 emissions of any energy that you can use. But they're trying to save their economy. Now, we had another alternative in England. Again, you may not have heard this story, but last winter, the culmination of the British government's desire to close the coal-fired plants and replace them with natural gas plants created a problem, because they had a very cold winter and they couldn't get the gas supply to keep the factories and the houses warm because the gas supply was diminishing so rapidly. So they had an energy problem, again caused by the, quote, global warming people, the elites who pressured the government to close the coal plants, convert to natural gas, not knowing that they didn't have enough natural gas to supply.
Mm-hmm.
I checked yesterday, and the forecast for England is another very cold winter, especially in January, February, and into March. And there are now concerns there's going to be enough natural gas supply to keep the homes and the business running in England. All these things are all part of the global warming process. We're not talking about them in the United States.
No, and I really appreciate, Dan, how you talk about how this doesn't fit with the American mainstream media's agenda, because, European countries, France in particular, they're supposed to be the docile citizenry that's expected and appropriate. For example, if we over here take to the streets and protest the tax increase, 100%, we're going to be called terrorists, even though Antifa actually, does turn violent, and they want Marxism, and of course they're not terrorists; they're just freedom fighters. But over there, they're supposed to be evolved. They have evolved sensibilities. They're more towards the social welfare part of things, more socialistic,
more politically correct.
More politically correct. But for the people of France to take to the streets over a tax increase is something that, all of the sudden, the right in America isn't so crazy after all, are we? There is a limit. Right. There is a number that's too high. Now, and I'd like for you to comment on that, but also, is it also more about globalism, too? It's not, the fuel taxes and the global warming, but it's also about this idea of globalism, and the people in the countries are being left behind.
Well, there's a lot of work in that question.
Yeah, I know. It's a broad one.
Just a couple of, that's okay. That's all right. Just a couple of quick observations. The original protest 4 weeks ago was on the initial, already in place, increase in both gasoline and fuel taxes. And with the announcement by the head of France that he was going to increase them again after the first of the year. But, and if the American media, which is reporting that the protests are about gas taxes, is not aware or not reporting that it has morphed into an attack basically on the elite structure in France. And Macron is perceived now by the people, at least in this particular protest, as being squarely in the corner of the elites against the middle class of the poor. So it's now evolved not just gas taxes, income taxes, lack of jobs, unemployment 10%. So a whole raft of economic issues and government issues are now thrown into the mix of this protest. And it started off with taxes as it relates to energy, but it's now morphed into an all-out assault on the elites and what they're trying to do in France. it will, and it's spilled in over the weekend, as I said, in Brussels and in the Netherlands. And I suspect we're already seeing a potential in Germany and other countries. So you're seeing a revolt to the, as you said, globalism. And I suspect that while over the weekend we had a production cut in OPEC, the words now are, is OPEC falling apart? Well, the question is, there's supposed to be a vote tomorrow on the European Union exit by the British. Is it possible that the European Union is going to fall apart?
Yeah.
And these are all globalist issues that the global network supported. That's all coming under attack. And it's coming from the middle class. It's not coming from the elite. It's coming from the vast, unwashed middle class and poor who are revolting, just as we are in the United States, still trying to capture our country.
It is incredible. It's almost like everybody has just woken up at the same time. Bringing it back to the original story with the UKIP and their protest against Brexit. You just said France. It's turned into a protest just about their elite culture, and that's what it is in Britain. And that's what it's almost like these people have realized. Oh my gosh, we've been conquered. I mean, you've got Britain and France facing essentially the same problem. Okay, I was talking about this earlier. The reason we know that it is globalism, and it's not some myth, it's not some unicorn, it really is globalism, is because so many developed countries across the planet are having the same domestic political issues. Here in our country, it's about immigration and securing our borders. That's the same problem that many people have over in Europe. That's not a coincidence.
Yes. No, it's not. It's not. And I don't know whether you have, if you're married, you have any kids or not, but there's a wonderful, I think a wonderful analogy here. When my children were little, one of the stories they liked to hear me read to them was the emperor had no clothes. Do you remember that? Did you ever hear that story?
Yes. And I do have, I do have a wife and one child, yes.
Okay, good. Terrific. So it's for your listeners who may have not heard it. It's a simple children's story about two crooks who come to town and try and convince the king that they can spin magical cloth, and they sell him, and his ego lets him believe that they're actually spinning cloth, and everybody in the community, in the town, and the country is afraid to say to the president, the king, he doesn't have any clothes on. So they go along with the idea that it's okay to believe that the king is naked because he's got this special fabric, and only certain people can see it. So nobody wants to admit until the king is out on parade. One of the children stands up and says he doesn't have any clothes on, and the lights go on, and everybody says, "Wait a minute, what's going on?" Well, your observation about why it's all happening at the same time is that there are millions of people all over the world who are like a little boy and realize just how naked they were and how much they had been misled by the elites around the world.
The illusion, yeah. People are aware. They can see it now. Dan Perkins, it's always great to have you on, sir. Again, you can find his stuff at thehill.com. He's also an author. Look up The Brotherhood of the Red Nile Trilogy on Amazon. And, Dan, we really appreciate you spending time with us this morning.
Sure. And people can go to my website, danperkins.guru, and get all kinds of stuff.
All righty. Dan Perkins, everybody.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Folks, we're going to take a break. Always great to have him on. Very insightful. We'll be back here in just a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
We're protesting for any other issue, it would have been wall-to-wall coverage by the mainstream media, and your anchormen would have been there on the streets with their camera crews doing live coverage. But because they were protesting a climate change tax, the media basically hushed up the story. Emmanuel Macron was raising taxes to the point that a gallon of gas in France would have cost over $7. And the reason why is he said we need to punish people for using fossil fuels to address climate change. And the regular folks of France who cannot afford this tax took to the streets in protest. And yeah, after a week of violent protests, 4 people died. I mean, it was a tragedy what happened, the amount of damage and death. But the president of France had to back down and say, all right, we're not going to put this forward. But this is the radical agenda people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are trying to push down in America. These are the types of punitive taxes they want to
Bob
punish.
Maloney here with a developing story from ASA News The Parrot. China is coming to Arkansas. We go live to the press conference where the Communist Chinese executive is addressing Arkansans for the first time. Let's listen into the translator.
On behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, we invite you to come and visit the newest named city in Arkansas, China, Delphia. We are very pleased to own an American city. Our communist government is proud to do business with the mediocre state of Arkansas. We are happy to take your money and your trees and send the profits back home. The Communist government of China was pleased to learn the taxpayers of Arkansas are excited to contribute their money with the hope, if you build it, one day jobs will come. We are excited to take your fields of capitalism and turn them into fields of communism, where every Arkansan has nightly dreams of Mao. China is looking forward to our investment of $1 billion in what is now called Arkansas. We see this as an investment in our future, and that future will be called New Beijing. Chinese investment will make Arkansas a great place for jobs as the People's Republic of China will succeed where the Soviets failed. As we build our roots deep in Arkansas, we are thrilled with the potential new ideas and advancement we will share with our people back home. Soon we will have the world's largest runway in the South China Sea, and we thank Arkansas for contributing to our noble cause. In closing, once we make China great again, all of you will see the glory of the revolution of Mao. And Arkansas, whatever you do, please never call the FBI.
Paul Harrell, Parrot.
All right, so it's
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Okay. Do what? Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. The jokes in this, the jokes that go unheard in this studio. All right, so I had a thought yesterday. I was listening to a sermon on Christmas yesterday, and so I was sitting here thinking. They were talking about the birth of King Jesus, which is why we celebrate Christmas, by the way. And it has been said before, the circumstances, material circumstances surrounding the birth of Christ is extremely humbling, because you've got the King of the universe, the King of everything, an eternal being born in a manger, outside of a motel that wouldn't even take him, essentially, near the farm animals and everything. Just it's really, really, and I thought to myself, that's true. In essence, Jesus condescended and, became the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. Very humbling to become poor so that we might become rich. That's the whole, concept. And even in his birth, Jesus is essentially teaching in parables, in a way, based around those circumstances, based around the material environment that was around him. Because it's like, oh my gosh, the King of Kings in a manger. It just doesn't make any sense. Joe, you had said, I think during the break, he came as the suffering servant, that's another reason why he was born in a manger. But I had this thought yesterday, because I was listening to this sermon saying, he should have been born in a palace. He should have been born with all these servants. He should have been born with, basically the best man could offer. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, that's true. I mean, and it's fine to feel that way, but what it wouldn't make any difference. If you think about it, I mean, the best that we could have here on this planet is still infinitely far away from where he came from. You know what I'm saying? Like clothing yourself in, human flesh, condescending to the earth is humiliating. You know what I'm saying? And so it doesn't matter. Well, okay, might as well go for a manger, because none of it matters. The very fact of entering into this world is dirty, and you're subjecting the King of all creation, subjecting himself to the rules of this place and the in the curse that was placed on this world. It's just fascinating to me, even more so.
Use the phrase the rules of this place.
Yeah,
the rules of this place. I think if he was born as a king, like an actual king, a prince in a palace, I think the rules of society at any point in time would have prevented him from doing some of the things he was able to do. He would have, him being Jesus, would have found other ways to perform these miracles because he is God. He would have been able to do these things, no problem. But I think being more of a suffering servant, being lowly in this case, allowed him to do more and gave him the opportunities to do more and be more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously it worked out perfectly, but it just dawned on me, right? It's like I think a lot of times we forget just how much we are in need. No. I think oftentimes we forget how much we are in need, and we forget, just how even the best things on this planet are nothing compared to, this stuff here is all temporal, nothing compared to the eternal. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, be born in a palace, be born in a manger. From an eternal standpoint, you're coming to earth, man. It's not a great place here, right? It's not a great place. It's a broken place. It's a fallen place. So it doesn't, really doesn't even matter. Anyway, that's just a thought. And you know why you have these new thoughts about the gospel? It's because it's inexhaustible. It's inexhaustible. There's always different ways that it can change and transform. Arkansas, have a great week. Be safe.